The wine glasses were catching the late afternoon sun through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Rosedale mansion, and I could see my wife Elena checking her phone for the third time in 10 minutes. We'd been married for 8 years, and I'd learned to recognize that particular kind of silence. The kind that came before someone asked you for something they knew you couldn't afford. "My father wants us to come for dinner Friday," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Just family. Mother insists." I set down my coffee. At 62, I'd gotten good at reading between lines. Just family meant her parents would spend 3 hours reminding me, politely, of course, that their daughter had married beneath her station. "I'll be there," I said. She glanced at me then, and I saw something flicker across her face. Disappointment? Resignation? After 8 years, I still couldn't quite tell. I'd met Elena Hartwick at a charity gala in Toronto 9 years ago. I was there because my assistant had purchased the ticket before I could stop her, insisting it was good for networking. Elena was there because her family had funded the children's hospital wing we were celebrating. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. And when she laughed at something her friend said, I found myself walking over before I'd made a conscious decision to do so. "I'm James," I'd said, offering my hand. "James Mitchell, Elena Hartwick." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "Are you enjoying the evening?" "I'm enjoying it more now." It was a terrible line, but she'd laughed anyway. We talked for 2 hours, standing by the dessert table, while the gala swirled around us. She told me she worked at an art gallery in Yorkville. I told her I was a financial consultant, which was true in the most technical sense. I consulted on my own finances, which happened to be considerable. What I didn't tell her was that I was the anonymous majority shareholder of Hartwick Industries, her father's pharmaceutical empire. That I'd been quietly accumulating shares for 6 years through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts. That I owned 58% of the company her family had built over 3 generations, and they had no idea I existed. I had my reasons for the secrecy. When I was 35, I'd made my first million in tech stocks, right before the dot-com crash that should have ruined me. Instead, I'd pulled out at exactly the right moment, parlayed that into real estate, then private equity, then pharmaceuticals. By 40, I was worth 8 figures. By 50, it was 9. By 60, I'd crossed into territory where the numbers stopped meaning anything concrete and became more like points in a game. Only a few thousand people worldwide were playing. But I'd also watched my first marriage disintegrate the moment my ex-wife Linda discovered how much I was actually worth. She'd loved James Mitchell, the guy who drove a 10-year-old Volvo and wore the same jacket to every restaurant. She'd tolerated James Mitchell, the millionaire with a nice house in Forest Hill. She'd divorced James Mitchell, the multi-billionaire, after hiring 3 different forensic accountants to make sure she got every penny she was entitled to. The lawyer's fees alone had cost me $14 million. The betrayal had cost me something I couldn't put a price on. So when I met Elena, I made a decision. I would be James Mitchell, financial consultant. I would drive my old Volvo, which I actually preferred to the Bentley, sitting in a climate-controlled garage in Oakville. I would wear nice but unremarkable clothes. I would live in a comfortable but not ostentatious house. And I would wait to see if someone could love me for who I was, not what I had. Elena seemed perfect. She was intelligent, funny, passionate about her work at the gallery. She came from money, yes, but she'd chosen to make her own way rather than live off her father's empire. We dated for 6 months before I met her parents, and by then I was already in love with her. The first dinner at the Hartwick estate should have been my warning. Richard Hartwick was 68, silver-haired, and had the kind of presence that came from 4 decades of running a company worth $30 billion. His wife Margaret was elegant, soft-spoken, and watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. "So, James," Richard had said, cutting into his venison with surgical precision, "Elena tells us you're in finance?" "Financial consulting," I'd said. "I help clients optimize their investment portfolios." "Independent. Or are you with one of the big firms?" "Independent. Smaller client base, more personalized service." He'd nodded slowly, the way you might nod at a child who just explained why they wanted to be an astronaut. "And how's that working out for you?" "I can't complain. I make a comfortable living." "Comfortable," Margaret had echoed, as if testing the word. "That's wonderful, dear. It's so important to be content with what you have." Elena had reached under the table, and squeezed my hand. At the time, I'd thought she was offering support. Looking back, I wonder if she was apologizing. We got married in a small ceremony at a boutique hotel in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Elena wanted something intimate, and I was grateful. Her parents paid for everything, which grated on me but seemed to make them happy. Richard gave a toast about how love mattered more than money, and I'd seen a few of Elena's relatives exchange knowing glances. The first year was good. We bought a house in Leslieville, a renovated Victorian that Elena fell in love with. It was nice, but not extravagant. Exactly the kind of place a successful financial consultant and an art gallery manager might buy. I paid cash, but I made it look like a mortgage on the paperwork. Elena seemed happy. She'd wake up early to make coffee, and we'd sit on our back deck watching the neighborhood wake up. She'd tell me about difficult clients at the gallery, and I'd listen and offer advice. In return, I'd tell her carefully curated stories about my own work, leaving out the parts about the billions and focusing on the human elements that were actually true. But around year 3, something started to shift. It was small things at first. Elena started mentioning her friend Rebecca, whose husband had just made partner at his law firm. Then it was her college roommate Simone, whose husband had started a successful tech company. Then it was a casual comment about how nice it would be to have a cottage up north, like her parents did. "We could get one," I'd said. "There are some affordable properties around Muskoka." Affordable, she'd repeated, and there was that word again, loaded with implications I didn't want to examine. By year 5, the comments were less subtle. We'd be at a restaurant, and she'd say, "Rebecca and Martin are going to the Maldives for 2 weeks." We'd drive past a luxury car dealership, and she'd mention how impressive her colleague's new Mercedes was. We'd visit her parents, and her father would ask me, with increasing skepticism, how the consulting business was going. I kept waiting for her to see past the surface, to notice that I never worried about money, that I could always afford whatever she wanted, that I just chose not to spend ostentatiously. To wonder why a simple financial consultant could pay cash for a house, why I had such detailed knowledge of pharmaceutical industry trends, why I sometimes received calls I'd excuse myself to take in private, but she never did. Or if she did, she chose not to dig deeper. Around year 6, Richard Hartwick suffered a minor heart attack. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to make him start thinking about succession. Elena began spending more time with her parents, and when she came home, she'd be quieter than usual. "Daddy's thinking about retiring in the next few years," she told me one night. "He wants to make sure the company's in good hands." "That makes sense," I'd said, knowing that I'd just blocked a hostile takeover attempt on Hartwick Industries the week before. As the majority shareholder, I had veto power over any major corporate decisions, though the family had no idea who was wielding that power. To them, the anonymous benefactor, as the board had started calling me, was a mystery they'd been trying to solve for years. "He's disappointed that neither Michael nor I wanted to go into the business," she continued. "Michael was her younger brother, who'd become a documentary filmmaker. He says the company will probably be sold to a conglomerate after he's gone." I could have told her that wouldn't happen, that I'd never allow it, that I'd spent years carefully positioning myself to protect the company because, despite Richard's condescension toward me, I respected what he'd built. But I said nothing. Last month, things came to a head. We were at a fundraiser for the Art Gallery of Ontario, the kind of event Elena loved and I tolerated. I was wearing a suit I'd bought 12 years ago, still perfectly serviceable, when Elena's friend Natasha approached with her husband Colin, who apparently owned a string of successful restaurants. "James!" Natasha had exclaimed, air-kissing near my cheeks. "How wonderful to see you. Colin was just saying we should all have dinner soon. Have you been to his new place on King West?" "Not yet," I'd said. "Oh, you must. Though I suppose." She'd glanced at my suit, then at Elena with something like pity. "Well, it's a bit pricey, but Colin can get you a discount, I'm sure." Elena had smiled tightly. "That's kind of you." Later, in the car, she was silent for a long time. Then, "I'm tired, James." "Long day?" "No, just tired." 2 weeks ago, I'd come home early to find her on the phone with her mother, speaking in low tones. She'd hung up quickly when I walked in. "Everything okay?" I'd asked. "Fine. Just checking in with Mother." But I'd seen her laptop open on the kitchen table, the screen showing a real estate listing for a penthouse in Yorkville. The price was $3.2 million, far beyond what she thought we could afford. Which brought me to Friday night. To the dinner her mother had insisted on. To whatever it was her parents wanted to say that required a family-only gathering. I pulled into the circular driveway of the Hartwick estate in my Volvo, which looked comically out of place between the Mercedes and the Range Rover already parked there. The house was a stone mansion in Forest Hill, the kind of place that whispered old money so loudly you could hear it from the street. Elena got out without waiting for me, smoothing her dress as she walked toward the entrance. I followed, noticing the way she held her shoulders, the tension in her neck. Margaret greeted us at the door, elegant in cream-colored silk. "Elena, darling, James." She kissed her daughter warmly and offered me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Do come in. Your father's in the study." We found Richard standing by a massive mahogany desk, pouring scotch from a crystal decanter. He was wearing a cardigan over his dress shirt, the kind of casual formality that probably cost more than my car. "There you are," he said, handing Elena a glass and nodding toward another for me. Sit. Margaret, bring out those appetizers, would you?" We settled into leather chairs that probably cost 5 figures each. Richard took his time, sipping his scotch, studying me the way a jeweler might study a cubic zirconia someone was trying to pass off as a diamond. "James," he finally said, "I want to talk to you about something important, man to man." Elena's hand tightened on her glass. "Of course," I said. "You've been married to my daughter for 8 years now." "I have. And in those 8 years, I've watched her compromise everything she was raised to expect. She lives in a small house in a middle-class neighborhood. She drives a car that's 7 years old. She works at a gallery when she could be traveling the world, pursuing her passions without financial constraint. She loves her work?" I said quietly. "She does it because she has to," Margaret interjected, entering with a tray of canapes. "Because you can't support her properly." Elena was staring at her lap. Now, Richard held up a hand. "Let's not be harsh. James, I'm sure you're doing your best, but the reality is that my daughter married someone who can't provide the life she deserves. And I think you know that." I took a sip of the scotch. It was excellent. A 40-year Macallan that probably went for $3,000 a bottle. "What exactly are you suggesting, Richard?" He set down his glass and picked up a leather portfolio from his desk. "I'm suggesting that you both deserve a fresh start. Elena deserves someone who can match her station, her upbringing, her expectations, and you deserve someone who won't always be wishing you were more than you are." He slid the portfolio across the desk to me. "Inside, you'll find documents that will make this transition as painless as possible. I'm prepared to offer you $5 million. No-fault divorce, clean break, no lengthy court proceedings. You sign. You walk away financially secure. Elena gets to rebuild her life, and we can all move forward with dignity." The room was completely silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. I opened the portfolio slowly. Inside were divorce papers, already filled out. A check for $5 million. A non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from ever discussing the Hartwick family with anyone. $5 million, I said, running my finger along the check's edge. "That's more than generous," Richard said. "It's more than you'd make in 3 lifetimes doing what you do." "Daddy," Elena said softly, her voice strained. "It's for the best, sweetheart," Margaret said, sitting beside her daughter. "You've been unhappy. We can all see it." I looked at Elena then, really looked at her. She was crying silently, tears running down her cheeks. But she wasn't protesting. She wasn't defending me. She wasn't telling her parents they were wrong. She was crying because she knew they were right. Because this was what she wanted too, but didn't have the courage to ask for herself. 8 years. 8 years of carefully constructed lies, not about who I was, but about what I had. 8 years of waiting for her to love me enough to not care about the money. 8 years of hoping that simplicity and authenticity would matter more than luxury and status. I closed the portfolio. "That's a very generous offer," I said. $5 million is a lot of money." Richard nodded, satisfied. "I knew you'd be reasonable. You're a good man, James. You've just been a poor fit for our family. The thing is," I continued, my voice steady, "I'm not sure $5 million is the right number." His eyebrows rose. "I assure you, it's more than fair. If you're thinking of negotiating, I'm thinking that you should probably call an emergency board meeting." Silence. "I'm sorry?" Richard said. I pulled out my phone, opened an app, and turned the screen toward him. Hartwick Industries. Current stock price, $42.16. Market cap, $31.2 billion. Shares outstanding, 740 million. Yes, Richard said slowly. So, of those 740 million shares, how many do you think you and your family control? About 38%, he said, his tone becoming wary. Why? And do you remember that anonymous shareholder your board has been trying to identify for the past 6 years? The one who keeps blocking hostile takeovers and preventing you from making what I consider to be strategically unsound acquisitions? Margaret's face had gone pale. The one who owns 430 million shares, I continued. 58% of your company. The majority shareholder who can override any decision you make. I watched understanding dawn on Richard's face like the sun coming up over Lake Ontario. Slow and inexorable. That would be me, I said. James Mitchell. Your son-in-law, the financial consultant who apparently can't provide for your daughter. Elena's head snapped up. What? At current market value, my stake in your father's company is worth approximately $18 billion. Give or take a few hundred million depending on how the Asian markets perform tonight. I set my phone on the desk next to the check for $5 million. The contrast would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. That's impossible, Richard said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Call Stephen, I said. Stephen Cho was the company's CFO, a brilliant man who'd been quietly taking my instructions through my lawyers for 6 years. Ask him about the investment group called North Star Holdings. Ask him who ultimately controls it. Ask him who's been protecting your company from 3 separate hostile takeover attempts. Ask him who made sure you had the capital to expand into gene therapy research when the banks wanted to pull your credit line. Richard's hand was shaking as he reached for his phone. You're lying, Margaret said, but there was no conviction in her voice. I'm not, I said simply. I've been many things in our relationship, but I've never lied. I just never volunteered certain information that wasn't asked for. Elena was staring at me like I was a stranger. You've been rich this whole time? Yes. How rich? Very. And you let me think, you let my parents think. Her voice broke. I wanted to know if you loved me, I said quietly. I wanted to know if I could be myself, without the complication of extreme wealth. If someone could care about James Mitchell, the person, not James Mitchell, the billionaire. You lied to me. I wore old clothes and drove an old car and lived in a modest house. Those are choices, not lies. You never asked if I had more money. You just assumed I didn't, and decided that was a problem. Richard's phone call was brief and brutal. I watched his face cycle through disbelief, shock, anger, and finally a kind of horrified acceptance. When he hung up, he looked older, smaller somehow. Stephen confirmed it, he said. You're telling the truth. I usually do. Why? Margaret demanded. Why would you do this? Why would you hide this from us? Because of exactly this, I gestured at the leather portfolio. Because I wanted one thing in my life that wasn't about money. One relationship that was built on something real. I wanted someone to love me because of who I am, not what I could buy for them. That's cruel, Elena said. That's manipulation. Is it? I never stopped you from pursuing your dreams. I never limited your spending beyond what seemed reasonable for our supposed income bracket. I never denied you anything you actually asked for. What I did was wait to see if you'd choose me over the lifestyle you were raised in. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's honest. I stood, straightening my old suit jacket. For 8 years, I watched you become progressively more disappointed with me. Not because I treated you poorly, not because I was unkind or unfaithful or neglectful, because I didn't have enough zeros in my bank account to satisfy your parents' expectations of what their daughter deserved. That's not true, she protested weakly. Isn't it? When's the last time you looked at me the way you did when we first met? When's the last time my company was enough for you? When's the last time you defended me to your parents instead of sitting in silence while they catalogued my inadequacies? She had no answer. I turned to Richard. I've already instructed my lawyers to begin transferring my shares. Over the next 12 months, I'll be divesting completely from Hartwick Industries. You'll maintain family control, the company will remain stable, and I'll be free to invest in ventures that don't require me to have quarterly dinners with people who think I'm not good enough to breathe their air. Wait, Richard said, standing abruptly. You can't just we have obligations, shareholder agreements, all of which I'll honor. I'm not trying to destroy your company, Richard. I never was. I've spent 6 years protecting it because, despite everything, I believe in what you've built. I just won't be insulted in the process anymore. I looked at Elena one last time. She was crying again, but these tears were different. Confused, lost. The divorce papers are fine, I said. Keep the house. Keep everything that's in both our names. I don't need any of it, but I won't be accepting the $5 million buyout. I think we both know that's insulting to everyone involved. I walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Elena, I did love you. I loved you enough to want to be someone simple and uncomplicated for you. I loved you enough to hope that would be enough. I'm sorry it wasn't. The drive home should have felt triumphant, but it just felt empty. I'd proven a point, sure. I'd shown them they were wrong about me, but I'd also proven that they were right about something more important. Elena and I were never going to work, not because of money, but because we wanted fundamentally different things. She wanted security, status, the comfort of knowing she'd never have to worry about judgment from her social circle. I wanted authenticity, someone who could see past the surface to the person underneath. We'd both failed each other, in our own ways. 3 months later, the divorce was final. Elena moved into a condo her parents bought her in Yorkville. I sold the house in Leslieville and bought something smaller in the beaches, close to the water. Richard retired 6 months after that, and Elena's younger brother, Michael, surprisingly, decided to step in as CEO. He was better at it than anyone expected. I date occasionally now, though I'm honest from the beginning. Not about the specific numbers, but about the fact that my financial situation is complicated and extensive. Most women lose interest quickly, which is fine. At least I know why. Sometimes I think about Elena, wonder if she ever regrets how things ended. If she ever thinks about those early mornings on our deck when we were just two people who enjoyed each other's company before expectations and disappointments filled in all the spaces between us. But mostly, I'm at peace. I learned something valuable from those 8 years, something that cost me a marriage but taught me a truth I needed to understand. You can't buy genuine connection, no matter how many billions you have. And you can't build a real relationship on the foundation of what someone doesn't know about you. The greatest wealth isn't in your portfolio. It's in being known, fully known, and loved anyway. I'm still looking for that. At 62, I'm patient enough to keep searching, rich enough to wait for something real, and wise enough, finally, to know the difference.